The question is deceptively simple yet profound. What is the meaning of life? A question that has echoed through the corridors of human consciousness since we first developed the capacity to wonder. Wonder about our existence, our purpose of being here. It hangs in the silent spaces between our thoughts, emerging sometimes in moments of profound joy, sometimes in the depths of despair. From the moment we become aware of ourselves as thinking beings, we are confronted with a peculiar situation. We exist in the present, looking backward at a past we only partially understand, and forward to a future we cannot predict. We know that we were born, and we know that we will die. But what came before our birth? What awaits us after death? And most importantly, what purpose does the brief interval between these two events serve? This uncertainty about our origins and our ultimate destination makes it extraordinarily difficult to determine why we are here at all. If we don't know where we came from or where we're going, how can we possibly know what our lives are meant to accomplish? How can we determine if our actions have any lasting significance beyond the fleeting moment in which they occur? The comfort of meaning. Throughout history, humans have developed countless answers to this fundamental question. These answers provide comfort, giving structure and purpose to what might otherwise feel like an arbitrary existence. For many, meaning comes through religious frameworks. A divine creator shaped the universe with intention, placing humans within it for a specific purpose. Our actions on earth are not random or insignificant, they determine our eternal fate. This narrative provides both meaning and accountability. A cosmic scorekeeper ensuring that our lives matter in the grandest possible context. Others find meaning in the connections they forge with other people. Love, friendship, family. These relationships give life its texture and significance. The meaning of existence is found not in cosmic design, but in the intricate web of human connection that sustains us through our days. Still others suggest that life's meaning comes from its mere existence. The miracle of consciousness, the ability to experience the world's beauty and complexity. These things are in themselves sufficient reason for being. Life needs no external justification. It is inherently meaningful simply because it is. And then there are the nihilists, who arrive at a radically different conclusion. Life has no meaning at all. Nihilism posits that existence is, at its core, meaningless. Our actions, our suffering, our joys, our accomplishments, all of it ultimately signifies nothing. There is no grand design, no cosmic purpose, no inherent value to human existence. We are simply here, briefly, and then we are not. Any meaning we perceive is merely a human construction, a comforting fiction we tell ourselves to make the void more bearable. Most of us encounter nihilistic thinking at some point in our lives. It typically emerges during periods of transition when old certainties begin to crumble but new frameworks haven't yet solidified. As adolescents outgrow the beliefs of their parents and begin to form their own worldviews, they often pass through a nihilistic phase, questioning everything they once took for granted. This questioning process invariably begins with a simple word: why? This modest three-letter word has the power to destabilize our most deeply held convictions. Why do I believe what I believe? Why do I value what I value? Where did these beliefs come from? Who taught them to me? If we pursue this line of questioning far enough, we eventually reach a point where we can no longer provide answers. We arrive at nothing. The word nihilism itself reveals its fundamental premise. Derived from the Latin nihil, meaning nothing, combined with xism, indicating an ideology, nihilism is literally the ideology of nothing. But this simple definition fails to capture the complexity and variety of nihilistic thought. Nihilism is often confused with pessimism, but these philosophies differ significantly. Pessimists anticipate the worst possible outcomes in any situation. They acknowledge the existence of good in the world, but believe that evil will inevitably triumph over it. Pessimists maintain a moral framework. They simply believe humans cannot fully embody its positive aspects. Nihilists, by contrast, reject the very existence of inherent good or evil. In the nihilist worldview, morality is not an objective reality, but a human invention. Good and evil don't exist independently of the human minds that conceived them. To return to the classic metaphor of the glass, optimists see it as half full, pessimists see it as half empty, but nihilists question why the state of the glass matters at all. Full, empty, good, bad. These distinctions are ultimately meaningless in a universe indifferent to human concerns. Nihilism also differs from cynicism, which holds that people are motivated purely by self-interest. Cynics believe goodness exists somewhere, just not within the selfish human species. Nihilists deny the objective existence of goodness or badness altogether. Similarly, nihilism should not be confused with apathy. Apathetic individuals might acknowledge meaning in life but feel unmoved by it. Nihilists, on the other hand, assert that there is no meaning to be moved by in the first place. Interestingly, nihilism presents us with a paradox. If you believe in nothing, then that nothing becomes something you believe in, which contradicts the fundamental premise of nihilism itself. This philosophical conundrum highlights the slippery nature trying to define an ideology predicated on the absence of meaning. Unlike many philosophical traditions that emerged from systematic academic inquiry, nihilism first appeared as a literary concept before being developed as a formal philosophy. This unusual origin has resulted in a philosophy that resists precise definition and has branched into several distinct categories. Political nihilism advocates for the destruction of all existing political, social, and religious structures as a necessary precondition for human advancement. Only by clearing away these artificial constraints, political nihilists argue, can humanity truly progress. Ethical nihilism rejects the concept of absolute moral values. According to ethical nihilists, notions of good and evil are merely social constructs that limit individual freedom. If we aspire to complete autonomy, we must transcend these artificial moral boundaries. Existential nihilism, the form most people associate with the term nihilism, maintains that life has no intrinsic meaning or value. Our existence is, in essence, purposeless, and any meaning we perceive is merely projected onto an indifferent universe by our meaning-hungry minds. For nihilists, societal institutions and moral frameworks represent artificial constraints on individual freedom. If we cannot explain why we should adhere to certain rules or values, why submit to them at all? Consider a thought experiment. If forced to choose between saving your pet or a stranger, whom would you save? Many people instinctively choose their pet. When asked why human life should be valued above animal life, few can provide a satisfactory answer beyond circular reasoning. This inability to justify our moral intuitions exemplifies the nihilist critique. We follow rules whose foundations we cannot articulate. But embracing nihilism comes at a psychological cost. The recognition that life may be meaningless can trigger profound existential horror. Consider all of humanity's achievements, our scientific discoveries, technological innovations, artistic masterpieces, social justice movements. Now imagine that all of these accomplishments are ultimately insignificant, mere temporary arrangements of atoms in an indifferent cosmos. Our joys, sorrows, triumphs, and failures, all meaningless noise in a universe that will continue long after every trace of human civilization has vanished. This prospect is so psychologically devastating that many people find it easier to cling to frameworks of meaning, however arbitrary, than to confront the possibility of cosmic insignificance. Friedrich Nietzsche occupies a unique position in the history of nihilistic thought, simultaneously advocating for and warning against it. On one hand, Nietzsche argued that there is no objective structure to reality beyond what humans impose upon it. Every belief, every considering something true is necessarily false, because there is simply no true world. He wrote, his famous declaration that God is dead was not a statement about literal deity, but a recognition that traditional religious frameworks no longer commanded the cultural authority they once did. People were increasingly charting their own paths and finding their own meanings, independent of established religious doctrine. Yet Nietzsche also foresaw the dangers inherent in nihilism. He predicted that the collapse of traditional value systems would precipitate a civilizational crisis, a prophecy that many believe was fulfilled in the catastrophic events of the 20th century. Without shared values and meanings, how can we condemn atrocities like slavery, genocide, or nuclear warfare as objectively wrong? How can we establish that figures like Hitler, responsible for immense suffering, were truly evil rather than merely operating according to a different set of values? Most people intuitively recognize these actions as morally reprehensible, but without an objective moral framework, we struggle to articulate why our moral intuitions should be binding on others. Despite these concerns, Nietzsche maintained that nihilism represented not an endpoint but a transitional phase. By dismantling outdated moral frameworks, nihilism could clear the ground for new, more authentic values. Like demolishing an old house to build a better one, the destructive phase of nihilism could ultimately lead to more meaningful construction. Nietzsche envisioned a revaluation of all values, through which humanity would create new moral frameworks, free from the prejudices and limitations of traditional systems. Looking at contemporary society, particularly as reflected in social media discourse, we may be witnessing another surge of nihilistic thinking. Traditional moral authorities, religious institutions, cultural traditions, established social norms, increasingly lack the power to define what is acceptable or unacceptable. Individuals feel increasingly empowered to chart their own moral courses, independent of external validation. This shift manifests in the fragmentation of moral consensus. Nearly any behavior or belief, no matter how previously taboo, now finds defenders willing to advocate for its legitimacy. The fundamental question, why shouldn't people do whatever they want, becomes increasingly difficult to answer in a society where shared moral frameworks are dissolving. We may be approaching a point where meaningful moral discourse between people with fundamentally different values becomes impossible. As we lack the common ground necessary for productive dialogue, if life truly has no inherent meaning, how should we respond? Shakespeare captured the nihilistic perspective with poetic brilliance. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Yet even in the face of this cosmic meaninglessness, we can choose to embrace the freedom it offers. Rather than despairing at the absence of predetermined purpose, we can seize the opportunity to create our own meanings, values, and purposes. Instead of seeing the glass as half full or half empty, we can discard the glass entirely and drink directly from the faucet of experience, savoring life on our own terms. In a universe without intrinsic meaning, the fact of existence itself becomes sufficient justification for living. We have one life, one brief, improbable moment of consciousness in an indifferent cosmos, and this realization can inspire us to make the most of it. Not because some external authority demands it, not because it serves some cosmic purpose, but simply because we are here, now, with the capacity to experience wonder, joy, connection, and growth. The most sophisticated response to nihilism is not to refute it, but to transcend it. Perhaps the universe does not come prepackaged with meaning, but this absence doesn't prevent us from creating meaning ourselves. In fact, it empowers us to do so with greater authenticity. Consider the existentialist philosophers who followed Nietzsche. Thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus acknowledged the fundamental meaninglessness of existence, but saw this as the starting point for human freedom, rather than the end of human significance. Man is condemned to be free. Sartre famously wrote, suggesting that the absence of predetermined meaning places the responsibility for creating meaning squarely on our shoulders. In this view, meaning isn't discovered like a hidden treasure. It's created through our choices and commitments. When we choose to value certain relationships, pursuits, or principles, not because they align with some cosmic plan, but simply because we choose them, we exercise our uniquely human capacity for self-determination. The meaning we create may be subjective rather than objective, temporary rather than eternal, but it is no less real or significant for being so. Camus addressed the natural human hunger for meaning in a meaningless universe through his concept of the absurd. The absurd arises from the confrontation between our desire for meaning and the universe's silence. Rather than surrender to despair, Camus advocated for a form of rebellion, acknowledging the absurdity of our situation while continuing to create meaning despite it. His essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, concludes with the striking image of Sisyphus, condemned by the gods to roll a boulder up a hill for eternity, only to have it roll back down as happy. By embracing his meaningless task, Sisyphus transforms it into a personal project of meaning despite its objective futility. Nihilism confronts us with the most unsettling possibility, that all our striving, loving, creating, and suffering ultimately signify nothing in the grand scheme of existence. Yet paradoxically, this very confrontation can lead to a more authentic and liberated approach to life. When we accept that the universe does not come with predefined meanings, we recognize our freedom and responsibility to create meaning for ourselves. We can approach life not as passive recipients of purpose, but as active creators of it. The meanings we create may be temporary, subjective, and ultimately confined to our brief existence, but they are no less powerful or valuable for being so. Perhaps the wisest response to nihilism is to neither reject it entirely nor surrender to its bleakest implications. Instead, we might dance with nihilism, acknowledging the void while continuing to create islands of meaning within it. We can recognize the cosmic insignificance of our existence while simultaneously honoring the profound significance it holds for us and those whose lives we touch. In the end, even if life signifies nothing in some absolute sense, it signifies everything to those living it. And perhaps that is meaning enough.